Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TBR's quarterly Telecom Infrastructure Services Benchmark Review. I'm Allison Crawford, and I will be your host for today's session. Over the past year, we have engaged with our clients to explain the developments in the telecom infrastructure services market and provide additional insight and opinions around what this really means. As a result, our clients are reporting a deeper understanding of market dynamics and coming away with a clearer picture of where to focus their efforts. We're thrilled at this feedback, and we're looking forward to continuing to connect with you to provide this information. Now, before I hand this over to Chris, there are a few action items I'd like to cover with you. First, we'll be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others that we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Chris will address them at the end of the presentation. Or, if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out to Chris directly at the end of the webinar to set up that discussion. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find these slides, as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight. And I'll be providing all of these social media links at the end of the presentation, so if you didn't catch them yet, don't worry about that. With that, let me introduce Chris Antlitz, analyst on the Networking and Mobility team here at TBR. Chris has been covering the telecom infrastructure services market for the past 5 years and guides the research on our TIS benchmark. His insight into operators and their competitive strategies have helped our clients improve their strategic go-to-market plans and improve their overall performance. And with that, let me hand this over to Chris.
Thanks, Allison, and welcome, everyone. So we're just going to jump right in here. Key developments in 4Q12. What happened in the market? What's going to happen this year? So 3 things that we want to highlight here. First is for 2013, LTE deployment in the Americas and China is going to be the key growth drivers of the TIS market, particularly China and Latin America. And we will get into more of that a little bit later, of why those two areas are going to be the main growth drivers. The second thing, the first 9 months of 2012, the professional services market was declining. And however, in 4Q12, we started to see a small recovery in the market. It grew 1% year over year. And there's a lot of things going on in the professional services market. We will be touching upon the major themes there, but just from a high level, EMEA was the primary reason, the primary drag on that services market. And it primarily consulting. We saw trail off demand for consulting. Some systems integration projects got shelved, so that was pushing out recognizing revenue from some long-term projects. And that affected the revenues in the first part of the year. Third is Huawei and ZTE. What are they up to? Well, managed services. Both companies making very big investments there. We will talk about some of the new GNOCs that they're opening up, some of the types of business that they're going to be going after, and some of their growth rates, which have been very good in that market in particular. So before we jump into the meat of the presentation, I just want to highlight what is TIS and what's included in it. So TIS stands for Telecom Infrastructure Services. This is all services provided on network equipment, so everything from the access layer through transport, the core layer, all the way through the service layer. It also includes back office software, applications integration, so things like OSS, BSS, systems integration, and maintenance. That's all included in the TIS definition. So this is bigger than an $82 billion market, so quite large and quite dynamic. And we cover this market on a quarterly basis, and we do forecasting and benchmarking. This is the benchmark portion. So we're identifying leaders, strategies, growth opportunities in the TIS market, and looking at each competitor and who's leading, who's lagging, why, and what are the developments that happened in the quarter that is causing that to happen. So we are processing all of that and then presenting that in our benchmarks. So this is an opportunity model. There's also market share and margin analysis that we do in TIS. So we cover the top 41 TIS suppliers globally across 4 main service segments: deployment, maintenance, professional, and managed services. And we track that across the 4 major regions, which is North America, CALA, EMEA, and APAC. So coverage list. This is the list of the 41 vendors that we track in TIS. It's a very broad list of companies here. There's a lot of niche players. There's a lot of end-to-end players. So we cover everybody from the traditional network equipment providers like Ericsson, Alcatel-Lucent, all the way to the niche service providers like tower companies like American Tower, and then we also cover the systems integrators quite extensively. So we are covering the entire spectrum of the TIS market. So jumping right in, this is the top 10 TIS players by overall revenue. You'll notice first off that Ericsson is continuing to outperform. And why is Ericsson doing so well in services? Ericsson has really fine-tuned their go-to-market strategy, their approach to the market. They lead with their services organization. So what does that mean? It means that they are coming in with their consultants. They are engaging with operators at the managed services level, and they are driving and pulling in sales of their hardware and software through their services engagements. So an example would be, take Sprint for example. Ericsson does their managed network outsourcing, so they manage the Sprint's network under a multi-year deal. So that opens opportunities for Ericsson to come in and upsell and cross-sell Sprint, which they have been doing, and that you can see that in the large portion of Network Vision, which Ericsson won. So that approach has been working very, very well, and that's part of the reason why they've been outperforming. The other reason is acquisitions. Ericsson has been very acquisitive in the last few years. They've bought some pure-play services firms like Optimy and Encode. They've also acquired some software companies that have services arms like Telcordia and ConceptWave. And those acquisitions have all given their services business a boost. Something else I want to highlight here, Alcatel-Lucent and Nokia Siemens, their top line is falling in services, but their margins are improving. And this is a testament to their restructuring programs that they've been doing for the last year or so. So in each of those restructuring programs, the companies are exiting some of the unprofitable or low-margin services contracts, and they are focusing more on the high-value, high-margin type services contracts. So things like systems integration, some of the more high-level maintenance services, and that's been really helping their margins. The other thing I want to highlight here is Accenture, HP, IBM. The three of them lagged in 4Q12, and this is indicative of the weakness in the professional services market as a whole. Those three firms in particular are heavily weighted towards professional services, and they bore the brunt of that downturn in the marketplace. So moving on to the Tier 2 suppliers, this is the second, so this is the people ranked 11 through 20 out of the top 41 vendors. So right off the bat, the M&A is fueling some very strong top-line increases here. Jabil and NEC in particular. Jabil bought Telmar, which is a spare parts and maintenance services firm, and then NEC bought Convergys's information management business, which is essentially a BSS. It's a BSS business. Both of those acquisitions were accretive to their TIS businesses, and they got very good growth off of that. We expect more M&A to occur as the industry consolidates. The TIS market generally is quite fragmented, and we expect there to be ongoing M&A as some of the more niche players and some of the end-to-end providers look to fill up their portfolios. and get better market positioning in certain areas and certain types of services. Oracle, they are going to be a strong grower in TIS this year. They are buying Acme Packet and Tekelec. Both of those firms do some TIS. And that will be accretive to Oracle's business there. And that's really going to position Oracle quite strongly in some of the software services in operators' back offices. So things like SDP, OSS, BSS, those types of services Oracle will be providing. Third thing is ZTE. They really struggled in 2012. Sales were down, margins were down quite a bit. We expect them to bounce back this year. Credit lifeline they got from the Chinese banks. They got $20 billion credit facility, and that will go to restructuring the firm, streamlining some of their internal operations, and helping them facilitate customer sales in certain markets where financing is a struggle for some operators. So let's talk about the operating margin leaders. So we talked about the revenue growth guys. Now, who's making the big margins? This is the top 10 TIS margin leaders. Cisco, they are standout from this graph. Their very strong position in routers and switches and their role as strategic partner in key operator accounts enables them to get above average margins. Cisco controls between 60 and 70% of the router and switch market, and they are very well entrenched in tier 1 operator accounts. And they are essentially, most of their TIS revenue comes from selling maintenance contracts on those routers and switches. And those are very lucrative contracts that they are writing there. So things like warranty services, level 1 through 3 support, those types of services, they get very, very good margins on those. The other thing that you'll notice here, software vendors, Microsoft, Oracle in particular, they can usually get high operating margins in TIS. They too are selling lucrative maintenance services contracts on their software. These are highly scalable, and they're typically provisioned remotely instead of on site. And the structure of those businesses are very high margin. Okay, so we're going to look at each of the 4 service categories individually, and then we're going to look at each of the 4 regions individually and talk about the dynamics and the trends that we're seeing in each of those. So we're going to start with deployment services. LTE build-outs in North America, Japan, South Korea, that remains the primary driver of deployment revenue. Ericsson, Nokia Siemens are getting the biggest benefits from that. Both of those firms are very well entrenched with the South Korean operators and the Japanese operators, and also with the Tier 1 operators in the United States. That's driving top line. They're not growing very fast, but they're growing in deployment, which many, some of the smaller firms there are not growing in deployment. So it's really about LTE and getting those networks out, rolled out, overlaid over 3G networks as fast as possible. Alcatel-Lucent, their deployment profile, North America is driving that business. However, it's being offset by a slowdown in EMEA. It's all of EMEA. Some of the LTE hasn't really started to take off in that region yet, and some of the legacy contracts that the firm had, they have ceded to other firms, or they have exited some of those contracts. So that has been a drag on their deployment business. We do expect their deployment business to bounce back very strongly this year because of the China Mobile, the massive China Mobile TD-LTE build-out. Just as a side note, China Mobile is going to be spending $6.7 billion on their TD-LTE deployment this year, and it calls for 200,000 base stations. So this is a gigantic deployment. I will note that Alcatel-Lucent did get one of the highest market shares within that contract. So that's going to be a huge driver for them in 2013 and through 2014 as the China Mobile contract. That's going to stretch over 2.5 years before they finish deploying LTE across all of China. Third thing, engineering firms playing a pivotal role in tower deployments. So firms like Bechtel, China Communications Construction, these guys are the ones that are actually deploying the cell towers. Okay, so they usually subcontract it out to actually erect the structures and provide the engineering services around site location and construction, equipment installation. So they're getting the benefit and the uplift from that as well. Okay, maintenance services. Aside from Jabil, who's an outlier, again, they bought Telmar, who's almost completely a pure play in maintenance services. That's where that growth came from. Generally speaking, organic growth in maintenance services is not very, it's growing, but it's not growing very fast. It's growing at a mid-single digit rate. And what are the drivers here? It's really about new infrastructure builds. So LTE, as these operators are deploying LTE, that is throwing off sales of, they're selling maintenance contracts on that equipment that they're putting out in the field. There's also some maintenance services being provided on the OSS/BSS systems that are being deployed to support the LTE infrastructure that's going out into the field. So there are some opportunities, but again, this is not a very fast-growing market. And LTE and IP deployments are really going to support this market going forward. Okay, professional services. So generally speaking, operators are still very selective on the consulting projects they're putting out for bid. This is especially so in EMEA. We have seen operators shelve some how can I say it? They are shelving certain projects that are not important in the short term, and they are focusing on more of the strategic projects that are going to give them opex reduction. So what's going on there? The projects that are getting awarded are of longer duration, and they're converting to revenue at a slower rate. This impacted HP, IBM, and Accenture the most. Some of the network equipment suppliers, you'll notice that they all grew in 4Q12. Part of the reason they grew is because of the systems integration services that are being provided to as the LTE networks are being deployed. So you have this RAN coming out into the field. There needs to be integration with the existing network elements, and that offset some of the weakness that we saw in consulting. So despite the weakness in 2012 on a whole, the need for professional services remains very strong. There's a few angles here. So professional services are required for deploying new network technologies, so the LTE builds. It's also very important for new business models, so deploying things like m-commerce, M2M. It's also important for opex reduction, so things like how do I adjust my cost structure to get more efficiencies out of what I'm spending. And consultants are brought in. Sometimes you need systems integrators to tweak the internal assets to get those efficiencies. So overall, we do expect the professional services market to be a very strong grower over the next few years. Okay, managed services. Ericsson, again, very strong managed services. They continue to win very large contracts around the world. Alcatel-Lucent and Nokia Siemens, they had a top-line decrease, but they had a margin increase. So managed services was the area of their portfolios that they are spending the most time focusing on, because that's where some of the lower margins are found in TIS. So what they're doing is starting to exit some of the field-intensive type contracts, so field maintenance, field operations type contracts. And that is, yes, that's leading to a decline in the top line, but it is definitely boosting margins in the managed services for them. Huawei ZTE. Let's talk about Huawei for a second. They are building they just built a NOC in Egypt that is going to support the EMEA region, and they are going to open a GNOC in Mexico in, I think, this quarter or next quarter. So that's just indicative and underscores how managed services remains strategic to the firm, and they are building their assets to be able to support more subscribers onloading. So they are positioning now for the continued growth that they've experienced in managed services. ZTE is doing the same, but they're a little bit lagging in new resource build-outs. But now that they have that credit line from the China Development Bank, we do expect them to start rolling out more NOCs and GNOCs to support their managed services business. Okay, so we've talked about the 4 service areas. Now we're going to move into the 4 regions and talk about the dynamics going on there. We're going to start off with North America. Tier 1 LTE deployments is the driver of TIS here. All 7 Tier 1 operators in the US and Canada are deploying LTE right now. And that is spurring deployment services revenue, maintenance, professional services. It's lifting all of those boats. And Ericsson, Alcatel-Lucent, Nokia Siemens are the biggest beneficiaries there. And they are the outliers you'll notice on this chart. NSN they are not as big as Alcatel-Lucent and Ericsson in North America, but they are growing very quickly. They have half of the T-Mobile LTE contract, and they also got the US Cellular rollout. So they also have some LTE business with BCE and Telus up in Canada. So they are starting to get traction in North America, and we are starting to see that. I mean, they had growth of upwards of 30% year over year in 4Q12. This is very good growth for them. Much of that is organic, so very good for that firm. Let's talk about Cisco for a second. They are trying to become a more strategic partner in key accounts. They're very well entrenched in the core of the network. They are trying to get more into the access layer. We see that with their acquisition of Ubiquitous on the small cell end. They're also doing a lot in Wi-Fi. Cisco is trying to move up trying to offer operators more than just the traditional routers and switches, and they are trying to leverage their position within those accounts to pull in more sales of like the professional services. So just for an example, architecture. Let's talk about network architecture for a second. Cisco has a very unique position within the backbone and the overall architecture of operator networks. And because they have that position, they are frequently brought in to consult operators on how should they optimize their networks, where should they add capacity to get the maximum benefit. Those types of conversations Cisco has with the operators quite frequently, and that they have a very unique position there to leverage and really drive their TIS business and pull through more sales of their products. Okay, EMEA. EMEA is a mixed bag. You'll notice on this chart that you have some guys that grew, some guys that declined, and then you have Ericsson in the middle. So let's take each of those separately. But first, the overall theme in Europe, especially, is opex reduction. Everybody knows that they're going through quite a difficult economic. It's quite a difficult economic picture over there across Europe, and operators are being very tight on the purse strings, especially for capex. They are spending, however, on opex reduction type projects, so things like outsourcing. That's been very popular in Europe, even with all the economic problems. There's also some systems integration work that's coming through to optimize their OSS/BSS systems, optimize some of their infrastructure. There's some modernizations going on there where they're ripping out and replacing legacy RAN with multi-mode RAN. That's all driving systems integration work and deployment. So there is some growth going on there, but they're also cutting back. They're cutting back on or delaying, I think delaying is a better word here. They're delaying LTE deployment, and generally speaking, they're delaying transformative investments to their networks. So that's where the big money is. Right now, think of it as they're doing tweaks here and there to get some optimized benefits, but the real transformation and really optimizing those networks and making them next generation networks, that investment is going to be stretched over the next few years as they start to feel more comfortable with the economic climate and they can justify making those investments. Huawei is taking market share. They won several managed services contracts across Europe last quarter. They got one in United Kingdom. They are winning them in Switzerland, Germany, Italy. Those are the main countries that they've been winning managed services. They're doing very, very well in TIS in Europe when many other firms are not doing very well. Part of the reason they're doing so well is that they are offering a cost. They're competing on cost in some instances. Also, they are. Huawei used to be a follower. Now they're starting to become a leader in some of the technology areas. They have very competitive RAN now, very competitive fixed technologies, and operators are really looking at Huawei and saying, wow, they have some really good and compelling technologies, and in some cases they are unseating incumbents in certain operator accounts and winning that business, and that is pulling through some services as well. So very interesting watching them and how they're doing in that region. Okay, we can move on to, Asia Pacific. Most companies are growing in Asia Pacific. Japan and South Korea are driving the needle here. LTE deployments are driving TIS here. So it's driving deployment, it's driving maintenance, it's driving professional services. Managed services is still, there's still a lot of opportunities in Asia Pac for managed services, but operators, especially in some like China, South Korea, and Japan especially, operators prefer to operate the networks themselves. They've not really been too open to the managed services model, so there are some opportunities there that the vendors can fill, as the operators want to, if they decide to start outsourcing some of those functions. So all eyes are on China Mobile. $6.7 billion this year that they're going to be spending on just their TD-LTE network. That's a lot of money. It is, just to put that in perspective, T-Mobile is going to be spending $4 billion on their LTE deployment over the next 2 years. China Mobile is spending $6.7 billion just this year. They're going to have to spend another $6 billion plus in 2014 to do the second phase of their LTE deployment. So massive contract here. Multiple vendors will be benefiting from this. It will be driving their TIS businesses over the next 2 years in this region. And then China Unicom and China Telecom will follow. They have not been too vocal about what their LTE deployment roadmap is. We know they will deploy LTE. Probably early 2014, you'll actually start to see actual deployment in the field for the two of those firms. So again, Alcatel-Lucent, Huawei, ZTE, they're going to be the biggest beneficiaries of that. Whereas if you look at Japan, South Korea, Ericsson and Nokia Siemens won the bulk of that business. Central and Latin America. So LTE ramps are just beginning in this year. There's going to be very strong growth in CALA this year and through 2014. And we are seeing a very strong propensity for operators to push through these LTE deployments. The governments in many of the countries in this region have been very good about getting spectrum out to operators very quickly, and they're able now to support these LTE builds. The governments are also incentivizing operators to and encouraging them to build out these networks very quickly for the economic benefits that they bring and just for economic development in those countries. So of all the emerging markets, I would say CALA is going to be the poster child for an emerging market deploying LTE at a very accelerated pace. And we will see very strong investments there in next-gen infrastructure and in new business model development in that region. That's going to be very good for the vendor population that's well positioned in that market. Nokia Siemens, they're an outlier here. Just touch on them very quickly. Their decline in top line is almost exclusively due to their exit of the Oi contract in Brazil. That was a $1.5 billion contract, managed services contract that they exited because it was low margin. They weren't able to get the profits from that they were expecting, so they exited it. And that is weighing on their business there. But if you take that contract out, NSN is growing very well, very strongly in CALA. They're very well positioned in Mexico and Brazil in particular. And we do expect to bounce after the effects of the Oi contract are fully are away in 1Q13. Okay, so coming back to the three key themes, LTE deployment, that is the overarching driver here of growth. In particular, it's going to be Central and Latin America and China are going to be the growth engines for 2013. There will still be some very strong investment in the United States and Canada. So that's going to lift a variety of types of services, stretching from deployment, maintenance, and professional. So that's going to help lift the professional services market this year. EMEA is going to remain weak, but operators are going to continue to push through with opex reduction type contracts, projects. And then we're also going to see Huawei ZTE start to scale up their new NOCs and GNOCs that they've opened up. They're going to be very aggressive, continue to be very aggressive in taking over managed services opportunities in the marketplace. So before we open it up for Q&A, I just want to highlight here some of the key topics that we are covering here at TBR. We cover all of the vendors on a quarterly basis after they report earnings. And what we do every quarter is we get the team together and we identify all of the buzzwords. So what are the big buzzwords that everybody's talking about in the industry? What companies are positioning there? How much money are they making? What's the market opportunity? Portfolio changes, M&A, all that stuff. We are, ongoing conversations about that. And this chart here identifies the next 4 areas that we are looking at very closely. So things like network function virtualization. This is a term that was much talked about at MWC this year. We're looking very closely at how vendors are planning to exploit that opportunity, what the future of networks are going to look like, where's the opportunity for vendors to make money there. LTE deployments, that's ongoing. We're covering that around the world. How much are vendors making? What's their market share? Contract profitability. We do all that type of analysis. Enterprise solutions. We are starting to see vendors step out of their traditional markets and move into more of the enterprise networking space. So Huawei ZTE in particular, both of those firms are starting to make big investments in enterprise as they seek to expand their addressable market and set the stage for long-term growth, especially as the telecom market is not a very strong grower. It's more of it's maturing. If you look at the share of, if you look at CapEx, global CapEx spend by operators, it's not really growing very fast. And the vendors need to really look outside of their core markets here and say, okay, where's the real growth opportunities? Where can we leverage our existing business to quickly scale into these new areas, these adjacent markets? The fourth thing we're looking at is consolidation. So things like Oracle buying AcmePacket and Tekelec, other potential M&A. We're looking at that very closely, how that will change the market landscape, how is that changing portfolio compositions, how is that changing vendor positioning within certain operator accounts. These are all areas that we are looking at very closely, and these are all topics. These are just a few of the topics that we are writing about in our syndicated reports for the vendors that are playing in these areas. So again, my name is Chris Antlitz. I'm an analyst in networking and mobility practice here at TBR. We'll open it up for questions.
Great, thanks, Chris, and thanks to those of you who have sent through questions now. I do encourage anyone who has anything to ask Chris to send it through. Chris, the first question we've gotten, are vendors still pursuing multi-vendor maintenance as a growth opportunity?
Yeah, so multi-vendor maintenance. This was a big hot topic. 2 years ago, it really became an industry buzzword, and we did see vendors positioning and marketing their multi-vendor capabilities. There is some growth there, but margins have not been very good. If you look at margins in the maintenance business, multi-vendor margins are usually lower than product attached maintenance type business. So we've also seen some issues with the structure of those contracts. So for instance, how are the vendors contracting with other hardware suppliers to a particular operator account? There's been issues and challenges to overcome in setting up these structures, and really it's burned some vendors. I realized that maybe it's not as big as lucrative of an opportunity as we originally thought. So with that said, vendors are still offering multi-vendor maintenance, but it's not the huge growth area that was originally anticipated, 2 years ago.
Okay. The next question that's come through: do you think Alcatel-Lucent will change its services strategy under its new leadership?
Yeah. So Alcatel-Lucent, so they're already in restructuring, part of the performance plan. They are exiting some managed services type business. We think they might have to change so Alcatel-Lucent might have to stop being an end-to-end supplier. There's some areas of the marketplace where they're not competing very well and they're losing market share. There's other areas where they're doing very well. So I think that the new CEO might steer the firm to their strengths and start to de-emphasize some of the areas where they're not competing as well in the marketplace.
Okay, looks like we don't have any other questions. Wait, hold on. Okay. Okay, we just got one more question then. Do you think NSN is an acquisition target? Looks like it's a two-part. Do you think NSN is an acquisition target, and if so, who do you think will buy them and why?
Yeah, so NSN. So Siemens has been very vocal in the last few months that they want to get out of their share of the joint venture. There was some speculation that Alcatel-Lucent might be interested in acquiring that stake. Actually, in my personal opinion, I think a much stronger case can be made for NEC buying NSN. And let me unpack that a little bit. NEC has been acquiring several firms in telecom. They have been really talking up how integral and important and strategic their telecom business is for their overall company. And we did see them put money where their mouth was. So they bought Convergys's IM business. They bought Netcracker a few years back. So they have been acquisitive. We did some, once Siemens said, we want to really strongly consider getting out of the stake. Internally at TBR here, we did some analysis of, who would actually buy NSN? Who would be interested and why? And really, NEC really came to the forefront there. If you look at the portfolios of both companies, they're complementary. NEC is very strong in microwave. They're very strong in OSS/BSS, and they're very strong in transport technologies. And if you look at NSN, they're very strong in the access layer, and they're strong in customer experience management and services in general. So if you hypothetically merge those companies together, NEC would be a gigantic force to be reckoned with in the telecom market. And we would not be surprised if something like that were to happen, given what their past M&A history has been and some of the positioning that they've been making in the telecom space.
Okay, thanks, Chris. It doesn't seem like we have a couple comments come through, but no questions. So with that, I think we are going to wrap up. We're almost at the end of our time with you guys today. There's a couple quick things that I'd like to point out, just to go back to the last section where they're talking about the topics they're going to be working on. LTE has been identified as a hot topic. We will be doing a thought leadership webinar in June. We're in the process of scheduling that out, so please keep an eye out for that invitation. Chris will be working on a thought leadership piece, both written as well as a webinar, so that will be coming out. As I promised, here are all the social media links. You can follow both Chris and TBR at the Twitter handles listed here, as well as visit our SlideShare and YouTube channels for additional content on the telecom as well as TIS markets. We'd like to thank everyone for your time today. As you're on your way out, we are running a short survey on both the content as well as the presenter. We're using this feedback to improve our webinars from quarter to quarter, so any feedback that you guys do provide for us, we are taking very seriously and appreciate your helping us out with that. I'm going to leave the chat function open for another couple minutes in case there's any last-minute questions anyone has, or you'd like to reach out to Chris to set up a conversation or get any more insight into the TIS market. We will be doing this webinar again next quarter to show you the changes over the next 3 months. So we look forward to speaking with you guys all again soon, and have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks.